A lot is taking place on the national scene as Canada looks to solidify its trade negotiations with the United States. And it seems that the two countries have hammered out a trade deal. With more on this is a Toronto Sun columnist and regular BCN contributor, Brian Lilley. Brian, thanks so much for being here once again today.
Thanks for having me at a time where everything is kind of fluid.
Oh, it really is. So it seems a new tentative trade deal has been reached, and it's one that may resurrect the Keystone XL pipeline, although that was already moving ahead. So, Brian, what can you tell us about this new deal?
Yeah, so about 10:15 p.m. Eastern Time, Washington, D.C. time, on Tuesday night, Donald Trump tweets or posts on Truth Social, that there's a trade deal with Canada. He's going to hold off on those 50% tariffs on $28 billion worth of Canadian goods. Now, most of that would not impact Alberta, as we've previously discussed, mostly going to hit BC, Quebec, Ontario. And then, not even 15 minutes later, he's posting an AI-generated image of him pulling the Keystone XL pipeline out of the ground because he's resurrecting it after Sleepy Joe Biden killed it off. Look, from what I understand is that Keystone XL was not part of the discussions. Now, is a resurrected form of Keystone XL going forward? We've talked about this before. TC Energy spun off their pipeline business into a company out of Calgary called South Bow. South Bow wants to resurrect the Canadian end of what was Keystone XL and connect it with an American pipeline that would use a different route through the United States and take Canadian oil into the U.S. Midwest. So this is all good. We knew this was going forward already, but it was a bit weird that Trump added it on to his announcement that there was some kind of deal. On, Tuesday night, we just didn't know what the rest of the deal was, but he was very excited about Keystone XL.
Right. Carney probably mentioned to him that it's already in the works, and so he just decided to take credit for it, perhaps.
Well,
possibly.
look, this is an issue that has been a political hot potato for years in the United States. I remember being in Washington, D.C. in 2012, in 2014, at the Conservative Political Action Committee. And you would have Republicans, and this is the biggest gathering of conservatives in the United States, and they would be chanting about a pipeline from Canada, about how we needed to make this happen. So this was a big deal. Obama killed it in 2015. Donald Trump resurrected it after he won the 2016 election. Joe Biden killed it after he won the 2020 election. And now Trump is trying to take credit for it. It's weird that a pipeline from Canada is such a political hot potato in the U.S., but it does come down to the push over, do you want fossil fuels or do you not? Trump clearly does. And look, if we can do anything that makes him lift tariffs on other things by saying, yes, you've got better access to Canadian energy, well, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Something else that seems to be really important to Americans is one that doesn't really apply here in Alberta, but it's putting American booze back on Canadian shelves. So why does that matter so much to the Americans, Brian?
Well, because I can't get bourbon here in Ontario, but I can when I go to Alberta. I'm not saying I've ever brought back a bottle of bourbon from Alberta to Ontario. That might be illegal. I don't know, but look, Ontario and their liquor authority, the LCBO, is the largest purchaser of beverage alcohol in the world. There's no bigger purchaser. Costco comes close, but LCBO is the biggest purchaser of beverage alcohol. So if you're a producer of bourbon or California wines or Tito's handmade vodka out of Texas, you want to be on Ontario shelves because that guarantees you an awful lot of sales. And even though it's not a huge part of our trade between Canada and the U.S., it's become a major irritant. 8 out of 10 provinces have banned American booze. Alberta and Saskatchewan initially banned American booze. And in the summer of 2025, I can't tell you the exact dates. You guys would know that better than I do. both provinces said, you know what, this is done. I know Alberta did it before the G7 in Kananaskis. But this has become a major irritant for the Americans. And they said, look, if you guys want any of these concessions that you're looking for, you have to put American booze back on the shelves. The American viewpoint is we have not banned any of your products. We've tariffed your products, but we have not banned them. And most of your country has banned our products, and that's not fair. And as I said, the LCBO, biggest purchaser of beverage alcohol in the world, that's the big prize. Quebec and BC, those are the next two. Well, guess what? Both of those provinces, they have their own issues. For Ontario, it's autos. For BC, it's softwood lumber. For Quebec, it's supply management. They don't want to put the booze back on the shelves unless they get significant movement on those fronts. And, that's still up in the air as to whether the premiers believe they have that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the premiers there, talk to me about the three premiers that this does actually matter for. So we're talking Doug Ford, Christine Frechette, and David Eby. What do they need in order to be able to come to terms with that?
So David Eby has been clear, like if there's no movement on softwood lumber, and softwood lumber tariffs, by the way, the effective tariff rate goes up to as high as 47%. That's not for everyone, but that's for some companies, some regions of the province, as high as 47% for softwood lumber. Well, that's, a pretty crippling tariff rate. It's been that way for a long time. Stephen Harper was able to get a deal that lasted for about 10 years. It expired just around the time Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister. Trudeau could never get a deal on softwood lumber, and Carney hasn't tried. By the way, there is a current review of softwood lumber that the Americans are doing. So it was not part of these talks. But, if you're David Eby and you're saying, well, I need to have movement on softwood lumber, are you going to put booze back on the shelves if you've got a softwood lumber tariff of 47%? For Christine Frechette in Quebec, supply management and dairy, that's a very big issue. Well, the Americans have said, we've got some movement on this. We like what we're seeing. Are you going to put it back on the shelves if you're going to have angry dairy farmers, showing up at your office and denouncing you? And for Doug Ford, it's all about autos. Where do the auto tariffs fall? There's 500 different ways that you can structure the auto tariffs. And if it's as high as 15%, that's not a deal that Doug Ford can agree with. If they're able to adjust rules of origin, meaning where parts come from, and how much has to be American-made parts, how much can be Canadian-made parts, how much can be from China or other countries. If they can adjust those and get it down to an effective tariff rate in the single digits, maybe Ford can agree to that. But he has pretty much said in the past, well, no deal unless the tariffs are below, are gone. And so saying it's going to be 15%, that's difficult for him. So there's a wide range of things going on for all these premiers, trying to figure out where they are at and what it means for their industries. Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, these provinces don't matter as much as the three big ones that are still on the table. Alberta would be a big one, but you guys allowed American booze back on the shelves more than a year ago.
Yeah, it's interesting that Canadians make up such a large part of that market for them. It's kind of a playing card, I guess. I guess there are not enough drinkers in America. They got to look to Canada. Brian, Dominic LeBlanc stood in Washington next to U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, and you noticed that he only spoke about one issue, supply management. So why is that?
That is puzzling to me because, look, supply management's not a huge issue in Alberta. It's not a huge issue in most of the country. It matters to a small amount of farmers. But in Quebec, it is like part of the cultural makeup. Supply management was brought on in the early 70s. And the plan then was we will protect small family farms so that we ensure that we've got a good supply of eggs, of chicken, of turkey, of milk and cheese. Well, we've gone from more than 100,000 farms protected by this to fewer than 10,000 on the dairy side. So supply management hasn't protected the small family farm. And yet this continues to be the myth that Canadians tell themselves. And I've spoken to people, and who are well versed in the ag sector, and they said, look, if we got rid of supply management, we would have huge dairy farms in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and we would ship the milk out and the cheese out from there to the rest of the country because that's where it makes sense to have all the cows. But there is a higher concentration of dairy farms in Quebec that are under the supply management system than anywhere else. Dominic LeBlanc, by the way, is, despite it, he's got a francophone name. He's actually from New Brunswick. He's an Acadian. He's not a Quebecer, and neither is Mark Carney. And yet the Liberals know that their bread is buttered in Quebec. And so they didn't talk about autos. They didn't talk about oil. They didn't talk about softwood lumber. The only issue that Dominic LeBlanc talked about on Wednesday afternoon while standing there with Jameson Greer was supply management, meaning dairy. This was bonkers to me. This is not the biggest industry that we need to be worried about. The Americans want to make sure that their dairy quotas that we've already given them are handled better. And now they're actually arguing, saying, look, you gave the Europeans a better deal than you gave us. We want the same deal as the Europeans. And, to a degree, they've got an argument for that. We shouldn't be treating the Americans worse than we treat the Europeans. And yet an awful lot of the dairy industry wants to go that way, which could scupper the entire deal for the rest of the country.
Yeah, for sure. Brian, you have said that much of what's being discussed in all of this could have been arrived at a year ago and caused so much less pain. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's very little that I see that is being discussed or is on the table now that myself and others weren't saying a year ago. Hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we agree to buy the F-35? Why don't we agree to give the Americans better access to Canadian oil and other energy sources? Why don't we say, okay, yeah, you guys can have preferred access to critical minerals in exchange for investment? Why don't we do all of this in exchange for lowering tariffs on other issues? And, that was seen as caving to the Americans. And yet that's kind of where we're at. And, we could have, had a lot less pain over the last year, Jeanette. Like, why go through a full year? And I understand that if you're in Alberta, you probably don't care that much about the tariffs because for the most part, they're not impacting you the way that they are in Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia. The new 50% tariffs, those are the three provinces that it was going to hit the most. Those are also the three provinces that have been hit the hardest by the existing tariffs. And the Americans are not, stupid about this. They are hitting the Liberals where it matters to try and inflict pain. It's the same thing that we do to them when we say, okay, well, the Republicans are putting tariffs on us, so we're going to tariff Florida orange juice because Florida has a Republican governor, and we're going to tariff Kentucky bourbon because they've got a couple of Republican senators, and so on and so forth. Those are the sorts of things that countries do to each other. We could have avoided all of this by going for a deal earlier on. Sometimes the deals have been called off or talks have been called off due to Donald Trump. Other times they've been called off due to our own stupidity. And that's the really frustrating part.
Brian, unfortunately, it looks like we are out of time, which sucks because I had so many more questions for you, but appreciate having you on as always.
Thanks for having me.